Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Ed Pinkwood. I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, and I was going to put this down, but I'm not going to. I'm a developer type, and every once in a while I'm a kind of musician. I did music more as a kid, but I still do stuff like that. Kind of a big nerd. I like doing nerdy stuff and like talking about nerdy stuff and things like that, movies and stuff like that. I also have a mental illness, or a couple, really. And I want to talk to you today really as a person. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any training in mental health. I'm just a person who's kind of dealing with this since I was a kid, about 12, 13 years old. And I'm just kind of going to talk about what it's like to have a mental illness from my perspective. And hopefully it'll, folks can gain some insight from that, learn some things from that. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about sort of what my diagnoses are. I have something called generalized anxiety disorder. And that was something I was sort of diagnosed with later on. I've also dealt with depression a lot during my life, and that was initially, when I was younger, that was the thing I struggled with the most. So generalized anxiety disorder, adult ADD is something I struggled with. It seems like, I don't know if the percentages are really higher, but it seems like a lot of developer types have issues with attention stuff. But I have adult ADD. I was diagnosed with that when I was 27. I think I had it my whole life, and it would have been helpful if I had known about it, like when I was in school. When I was in school, I often was the first guy, I had a lot of trouble getting homework done and things like that. I don't think in my high school career I ever finished all the homework that I ever had once a night. And I remember in my in the graduating class out of high school, I had like the third lowest GPA and the third highest SAT score. Kind of funny, but yeah, meds that I take, which I'm going to kind of go through fast, but I take medication as part of the therapy and part of the way that I engage with my treatment. And these are the things that I take. I take something called Lexapro, which is an SSRI. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's basically next generation kind of stuff that if you've probably heard Prozac, it is a drug in the same class as that. It works basically the same way. Buspar is something I take for anxiety, but it also seems to have an enhancing effect with SSRIs. And you'll often find, actually, as a side note, that when people talk about how these drugs work, they also say it seems to, even like doctors and scientists and stuff like that, because they don't 100% really understand why it works the way it does, but they kind of think it works a certain way. I also take Strattera. Strattera I take for ADD, and it helps me have my focus be a little bit better. I might have a day that doesn't go well, as opposed to like 2 or 3 weeks where I just read news feeds instead of working. And Strattera is kind of interesting because I believe it's the only thing on the market right now, at least in the United States, that's you can use to treat ADD. It's prescribed to treat ADD. That's not an amphetamine. And I have tried. I started off taking Adderall, which is a really common thing to take for ADD, which is an amphetamine. After a month, I didn't really like it. It sort of just made me anxious. But different people, different kinds of things. And I take Klonopin, which is kind of an as-needed thing, which is a tranquilizer. It is similar to things like Xanax or stuff like that. I took one this morning because I'm super nervous about giving this talk, and I usually do before I give a talk, and it kind of calms me down and helps me not have gigantic freakouts about stuff that don't really deserve gigantic freakouts. To get into kind of what it's like, for me, I think it breaks down in a couple different ways. I think the first thing that I deal with is this intensity of emotion. And if you've ever seen the movie Kill Bill, and there's these parts, there's a part when Uma Thurman's character, like the color of the screen changes, and she's really, really like mad, and it starts going, woo, and it's like that a little bit. You get real, for me, the things that are hardest is that I will feel like sort of a wave of emotion come on. And that's usually something where I'm very frustrated or very upset about something, and I feel kind of out of control of it. And the challenging thing with it is that it feels like a wave that I have to just kind of let go and stop and wait for it to pass. And even though I consciously know I'm not in a good place to make sort of good decisions or things like that, or say the right thing or stuff like that, I'm so driven by my emotion, and it feels so strong that I feel like I have to just kind of cut myself off. And if I don't cut myself off, I'm going to say something very hurtful, or I'm going to do something very bad. So that's a thing that I struggle with a lot, is this really strong intensity of emotion, where you sort of feel out of control with that. And then, I talk about that. Probably the biggest thing I deal with is this generalized anxiety disorder, and the anxiety is something that I struggle with all the time. I guess the difference that I would describe it as is that it's not just sort of being, somebody told me, said, I find the challenge to be explained to folks how it's not like their anxiety about a job interview or Mondays or stuff like that. It's not kind of being like a little bit nervous about stuff. It's sometimes it's having a really, really extreme stress reaction or a fight or flight kind of reaction in situations where it's not appropriate. Like, how should I describe it? If you have a situation where, like, I get nervous a lot about traveling. It's not actually about like the process of traveling. Like, I'm not afraid to get on the planes and fly. That actually doesn't bother me very much. But I get worried about, like, that I'm not going to have my stuff together. Like, I'm not going to have all the documents I'm supposed to have. I'm not going to pack the right stuff, or I'm going to forget, like, the power supply for my computer and stuff like that. And so the reactions I have to that can be, like, say, a week before that's going to happen, I will start feeling really extreme levels of stress. I'll start sweating. I have these, sort of physical manifestations where I get a real tightness, like right at the bottom of my sternum. And it feels like if you have like rope, and you have a rope and a knot, you're kind of twisting it, it's rubbing on it, it's painful. And you can't get rid of it. I guess the thing is kind of like, I'm having, it's so extreme that it's the kind of stuff where it would be appropriate if I was 10,000 years ago, I was like fighting a mastodon, or like a lion was going to eat me or something like that. But the problem is I'm having that about things like I'm afraid that I'll forget to print out my boarding pass, right? And so that's the kind of struggle. Is that it's not. They're, in a sense, they are natural reactions. These are reactions that are encoded into our bodies, I think. But the problem is I'm having them at inappropriate times where it becomes crippling, because you cannot do things that are sort of like normal, expected things for you to do that you should be okay with and doing in our society, in our culture. I have problems focusing, and I talk about adult ADD, and that's something that I struggle with to a fair extreme. The Strateris seems to help me quite a bit, but generally it's that feeling like it was particularly bad before I had any kind of medication, and before I was diagnosed with this. I had extreme problems, like doing anything I didn't feel like I wanted to do. Like, I wasn't strongly motivated to do it. It was very hard for me to do things like complete homework assignments and things like that. Complete reading assignments, things of that nature. College was something where I was good enough at doing things to half-ass my way through it, so I got a degree. Through not having the kind of skills, never having developed certain skills in terms of studying things like that, not learning really how to cope with that, not having any kind of medication to help with my focus levels, it was often things that were particularly challenging for me, where I really had to sit down and it was a concept I didn't understand, and I really had to work at that. That was something I had a lot of trouble with, unless I was just deeply motivated to do that. And I wasn't. I was interested in doing things like writing music and stuff like that, and not so much about learning 68,000 assembler code. I did really, really, really bad in my CS classes, which is why I got a degree in English. And I don't regret that. I got a minor in CS, but I got a C- in assembler, and I actually had to go to the professor one day and say, if I'm going to get worse than a C minus, could you please fail me so that I can retake it? And then it was a complex thing. Basically, if it's in a minor, you can't, like, if you fail it, if you get lower than C minus, it basically doesn't count towards your minor. So I had to go and do that. That was a fun thing to do, to go talk to a professor and say, please fail me. But it somehow worked out. I don't remember jack from it. And those things were completely useless to me. Let's see here. One thing that I had a lot of trouble with is this idea of spiraling chains of thought. And with medication, I think it's gotten better. And as I think I've gotten older and learned how to sort of like short circuit those things, I think I've gotten better at that. But it's really easy for me to take a certain event that's happening in my life, or particularly some kind of stress event or a potential stress event in my life, and construct a particularly negative outcome from that very quickly. So I can go from like, okay, this event happened, so then A, B, C, D, and then I'm here. So like, let's say, my manager or my project manager or whatever, wants to talk to me. He just says, hey, can I talk to you? All right. Well, so I will very quickly construct a situation where, he wants to talk to me, so I wonder what it's about, when's this project going to work out, shit, I don't know, maybe this is not going to. And anyway, it ends up with like that, me and my whole family are going to be homeless, or I'm going to end up in a Turkish prison, right? And it's super easy for me to get there. And I've struggled with that a long time. And of course, what happens is that feeds into my anxiety more. Because now I've associated this event, which may or may not, I don't know what the outcome is actually going to be. But now I'm associated with it with, oh fuck, I'm going to have to find a new job. Or something like that. And I can get there really fast. I'm really good at finding potential outcomes like that. I'm particularly also really good at obsessing on negative events, particularly things that involve conflict. If I get into a discussion that becomes heated, I tend to be the kind of person who gets emotional and takes things personally. And that's something I struggle with a lot, to detach myself from that. But I feel I have sort of a duality where I feel a certain sense of justice and how people should be treated and stuff like that, and that it's important to stand up for people when they're not being treated properly, I think. At the same time, I find conflict really upsetting, and I tend to obsess on conflict and negative events a lot. Even things, things that have to do with, I don't know, like going back to when I was in college and flame wars on like Rec Music Industrial on Usenet or things like that, right? That shit like that would keep me up at night, right? I mean, literally, actually keep me up at night because I was so stressed about this. Some guy was just being a fucking prick, right? Even things long in the past that I have regret about, not necessarily conflict, but when I was in the third grade, we had a spelling workbook that we were supposed to do, and we were supposed to work on it the whole year, right? Now, you may recall that homework and me didn't really get along, and so we were supposed to do these assignments, and we were really on our own to do those assignments. Well, that is not sort of how I roll, brother. And what ended up was, it was like the end of the year, and I did not have any of these work done. So it was like I had 100 assignments to do, and it was like 2 days before the end of the school year. And I don't know, it ended up working out. I got, like in spelling, I got a C or something like that. I don't know. It was third grade, and I can barely remember anything that happened in the past 20 minutes. But the point is, I still, over the years, I mean, 10, 20, so third grade. I'm 38 now, so let's see, I was probably 8 then. So 30 years later, it's gotten some better, but I will still feel a great deal of discomfort thinking about that and being embarrassed and ashamed of what happened. For something that happened in third grade, right? That sucks, right? That's and you know, why am I still carrying this with me? I know logically that that's not a sensible thing to do, but I do anyway. And then, you know, one of the things I kind of struggle with is this idea of unwanted thoughts. So these are things that kind of pop in your head. And maybe I've become more comfortable with it because I know that my brain is just really good at coming up with the least appropriate thing possible at a given time. And the second thing is I've finally learned when to keep my mouth shut and when not to. So not to share those things in certain places. But I remember when I was, say, in junior high, I had this period for about a year or two, and I grew up Catholic. So I was raised in a very devout Catholic family. And so, if you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, you know that it is very rote and quiet, and you say things when you're supposed to say them, and you don't say things when you're not supposed to say them. And it's not some kind of crazy ass, like, Protestant church where they like talk like to other people and stuff like that, and kids are running around and parties like that. Oh, you got your shit together. You kneel when you kneel, and that's the way. That's how I grew up. That's how it's supposed to be, right? So the problem is though. So as a like 7th grader, I would think of like just the stupidest things, like you see the priest holding up and he's blessing the host and magically changing it into the body of Jesus Christ and stuff like that. And don't laugh, it's not funny. No. But he ends up, and I was like, just imagining, like, well, no, what if he was holding up a hamburger? I think some kid in school said that to me one time. So now what happens is that I'm fucking terrified because I'm afraid I'm going to start laughing, right? And so I'm like, every time, like, I'm in a situation where there is something that it's not appropriate for me to laugh about stuff right now. I'm fucking white knuckling. Oh shit, let's just get through this. And I'm sweating, and I'm stressed out and shit. I'm like a fucking 7th grader. Why is this, such a big... But I really, it was built into me. Maria Bamford, she's a comedian that, she's super awesome. I love Maria Bamford. And Maria Bamford's been really open about her struggles with mental illness. And one thing she talks about, a lot of these unwanted thoughts, and she would talk about like being in church and thinking like, what if I just did, really a little more severe than the Burger King joke. But stuff like, what if I went up and like chopped up a bunch of people and went and pooped on the altar or something like that. Or she would, I always say that and nobody laughs when I say it. I thought it was funny. I laughed when I heard her say that. Or she would talk about that she was like at a starfish pool at an aquarium. This is like as an adult, and she was like looking at starfish. She was like, well, what if I just, and this is in public, what if I just picked it up and like kissed it on its little poop hole, right? But shit like that just happens, and I don't know, and I think I've gotten more comfortable with that, but it's a struggle when you have things where it's like, I don't want to be thinking about this right now, but it still sticks to me. The thing that's worse, the thing that's hardest about all this, is that, I feel like I can talk about this shit now, and I feel like some people kind of relate to that, or some people can see, at least empathize to some extent with that. The problem is this feeling that I had for the longest time, probably since 4th fucking grade until a long time, until I was well in my 20s, 30s, I still struggle with it, is this idea of feeling like I was just alone and disconnected, and I was not like anyone else. And when you feel like that, you feel like you're just fucking broken and you're never going to be right. I felt like, for the longest time, that something was wrong with me, that I was made wrong, and that I cannot cope in society. I thought that I just, it seemed like I'm a relatively smart person, I guess, and I feel like I can kind of get stuff, but it's like I always fuck it up. If I could just focus myself, if I could just get things done, if I could just motivate myself and do the things I know I should do, I could be very successful and everything would go well and stuff like that. But I always fucked it up somehow. And I would always say, like, things would be going well, and then I'd say something stupid or something like that, and people would get mad at me, or things of that nature. And the problem really is that when you feel like there's just something wrong with you, when you feel that feeling of just brokenness and disconnectedness from other people, that other people are not like you and they're just not going to get you. That loneliness that you feel is just absolutely crushing. I have dealt with issues of suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and self-mutilation for much of my life. For the most part, the times where I say cut myself or something like that, for me, I think it varies from person to person, but I think for some people it's like it is for me, that I did not know how to express how I felt. I felt like there was sometimes stuff screaming in me, like my brain was fucking screaming, and I did not know how to explain to people what that was like and why I would behave in certain ways, because I didn't know how to relate that to them. And I think for me, that's how I did that, was I didn't know how else to express that to people. And I still got scars on me from it, and that's still reminds me of what it was like to be that way, to be that teenager, or be a fucking 13-year-old and feel that way, feel completely disconnected from everyone. For me, I think actual sort of suicidal reactions have been very rare. I've had a lot of times where my emotion was very intense and I thought seriously about doing stuff, like I was, driving a car and feeling like I just wanted to spin the wheel and go off the road. The darkest it ever got was, I was, probably 29, and I was with my, I was at home, and I had barricaded myself in the upstairs bathroom with my back to the door, and my son's mom was banging on the door trying to get in, and I wouldn't let her in, and we had gotten a huge fucking fight, and I was just sick of it. I knew, I was in this place where that intensity of emotion where I know that this is a bad thing, but not only did I just not care, I just wanted to destroy everything. And I had a mouthful of pills, and I was just sitting there feeling her banging on the door. And I, at the time, our son was a year and a half old, and he was in there. Not with me, but with his mom. And that was honestly the only reason why I didn't swallow that, was because I could not justify, no matter how I felt, I couldn't justify leaving him on his own, because I couldn't do it. That just seemed like such a bullshit move to leave this kid who had didn't ask to be here, and somebody's got to take care of him. And my son's 10 now, and he still gets me through a lot of shit. I'm not the best father in the world by any extent, but that responsibility to him that I know I have has kept me from doing a lot of shit that's very self-destructive, and I know that's the case. So that's something side note. People always they don't want to talk about parents getting mad at their kids or really flipping out or just feeling like doing hard shit. Oh, no, all of this is normal. So if you have kids, rest assured it's okay and it's normal if you ever feel really intensely angry or upset or things like that. It's normal to feel that way, and that it should be okay to talk about and to deal with that. But that's a whole other subject. Anyway, the problem you get into with all this stuff, particularly when I talk about that loneliness and that crushing feeling of loneliness, the problem is with this depression and anxiety and the way that these things work is that this shit, if you suffer from this on a constant level where you have a chronic condition of anxiety or depression, that this is going to kill you one way or another. So it doesn't just do it and it's like that, say you suicide or something like that. You will die sooner because of chronic depression or anxiety. And there's a lot of pretty good evidence for this. There's an interesting article in the New Republic that talked about loneliness, but I tie this in really to anxiety and depression because I think that separation, those things are very tightly tied together. But basically, anxiety and depression raise the mortality rate for people. It describes in this article, a quote from that: emotional isolation is ranked as high risk factor for mortality as smoking. And there was an interesting study, I think it was done in the early 90s, that monitored, it was done in the Bay Area and monitored men who had HIV, gay men who had HIV. And it found that closeted men who had HIV, you can imagine putting yourself in that position, that feeling of being a closeted man, I can't entirely understand what that's like, but I can understand the idea of that you're hiding something fundamental to yourself, that you feel the need to hide that, and the anxiety and the disconnect that you feel from other people because of that. Closeted men with HIV died an average of 2 to 3 years earlier than men who were out in this study. So there's just a lot of evidence that it actually compromises your immune system. And Robert Sapolsky, which he did a lecture, he's a biologist at Stanford, has talked a lot about depression and the nature of depression. And there's a link here, if you can get my slides later. But he says depression is the worst disease you can get because of how debilitating it is. From that talk, World Health Organization says depression at the time, because in 2009, was the #4 cause of disability in the world. And essentially what he's getting at is that depression or, feeling anxiety or things like that, particularly with depression, it's not just you being lazy or your body just being like, man, I just don't feel like doing this. Actually, what's going on is that your body is having a severe stress response at that time and pumping out hormones and things like that that you would have in a typical stress reaction, a low-level kind of like a bear just bit my arm off kind of reaction. And the problem is you're not having that because a bear bit your arm off. You're having that reaction when sometimes for not any reason you can really identify. And that's the struggle with it. That's the problem, is that you're not having these stress reactions at a time where you probably should have it. You have it at times where in our society tends to trigger those things a lot. And with certain people, they have a predisposition so that if they have, say, 3 or 4 major stress events in their lives, their rate of having chronic depression goes up 30-fold because they have certain genetic predispositions. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to have that, but it's very typical that if they have 3 or 4 of those, that their rate of chronic depression goes through the roof compared to people who don't have those same genetic markers. So that really sucks, right? And there's not any good way to transition out of it. So that's a hard thing. And I'm not here to necessarily tell you how to solve those problems that I know at the time. I've got about, 2 minutes left on the clock. So I'm going to kind of push through this stuff a little bit. But the point is, this is a real disease with real biological shit that's happening. And it is okay to treat it like that. It is not okay to just not talk about it and be scared of it or tell people, well, you just need to buck up, brother. Or, no, man, it's okay. You're going to be fine. Well, that's just not helpful. Or calm down. I get people tell me that all the time. Calm down. If I could fucking calm down, I wouldn't have any problems. You think I've been trying that my whole goddamn life? Yeah. So, but I want to go through this a little bit. It's interesting, and in context, I'm a developer in languages that you don't want to hear about, and there's some interesting positives about that. I think things I talk about. I'm really good at constructing negative outcomes easily. Those are all that technique is often very useful in terms of identifying potential problems particularly when you're early in a project, you're making a decision about how to go and so forth. I'm pretty good at identifying potential security problems because, well, if you don't do this, well, what if the user does this? So I'd be accounted for that? Is that going to let? And what I found is that I actually kind of am better at that than a lot of people who just don't kind of think about that stuff. I'm really good at finding well, if you do this might happen, or this might happen, this might happen. So you got to consider all those things. So I'm not actually a particularly good programmer in the sense that there are way smarter people here who understand more complex stuff. What the fuck's a monad? I don't know what the hell that is. But I'm really good at taking patterns and applying those patterns to solve similar problems. So if I see a solution to a problem over here, I can take that and say, oh yeah, I can apply it to this and this, and I'm really good at that. So I'm really good at that stuff, and that is really advantageous when you're part of a development team. So, and I talk about anticipating potential outcomes quickly. And I think the other thing is that being empathetic and supportive to colleagues and finding great rewards in helping others. I find that, and that is part of who I am because I tend to be pretty empathetic. And that is really, really good for me. Some of the interesting things, I'm going to skip through this. I think there's a lot of things I have to work in the teams. I work remote. Our whole group is remote at Fictive. And one of the things I know I have to avoid is I have to avoid working alone for long periods. I'm the only person on my team who is where I am, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I have to be sure not to work at home all the time, because I will get in a bad mental place if I do. I have to kind of be around people, and I have to reconnect with people and stuff like that. For conferences and communities and stuff like that, I think the thing that underlines for me is that this, when I first got here, it was kind of scary for me because I didn't really know a lot of people and I didn't know where things were set up and stuff like that. So when I first got here yesterday, I was very quiet, and if anybody who was standing around me, I don't know if Ash is in here, I was talking to Ash, and she was being super nice, and I really appreciated her for doing that. And I was being very much okay, everything's all right here. Right? Okay, nice to meet you. And, not carrying any parts of conversations or anything like that, because I'm fucking freaked out, because I'm scared. I'm scared of the situation I'm in, because I don't understand it. I don't understand the social etiquette. That's something I've struggled with a lot, is that feeling of like, I'm in a place where I don't have the right social etiquette, and I don't know how those things work out. So, quickly, I think the key thing that I want to come away from with this is, even if you don't struggle with this stuff yourself, being able to help people who are around you, I think is really key. There's two things I want to say. One, this stuff varies for everybody. You're going to run into some people who say, "Oh, you know what? Depression is just this, and this is how you fix that." And or it's just that. And if you do this, if you eat a lot of kale, that's going to solve it. And more power to you, brother and sister, if you eat a lot of kale and that solves your problems for you. And I tell you what, that kind of shit can be connected to things like pituitary disorders, thyroid disorders, diet. Shit like that. So I'm not saying it doesn't work, but what I'm saying is you should not assume that it's going to work for a particular person. I am not an expert in this stuff, but I just want to talk about the things that are key. And the key thing, really, over anything else, is empathy. Empathy, 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 empathy. Like Steve Ballmer, empathy. Yeah. And then I'm going to throw a chair across the room. But that's the key. It's trying to put yourself in their place and try to understand how they got there. And sometimes that's harder than others, and sometimes you just can't. It's hard for you to get there. But even some glimpse of that is going to make them more human to you. And I kind of think this applies for everything, but particularly for people who are struggling with this and the dangers that they have to deal with, I think it's really key to be empathetic and try to understand where they're coming from. So the first thing I'd say is help them feel safe. Listen to them and try to understand what it's like for them. A key thing for me is acknowledge that they're frustrated. Know that they're frustrated. I know that what I deal with sucks, and it makes me make bad decisions or do things that are dumb or stupid or that I'm embarrassed about, and that are not the appropriate things to do in certain situations. I know that, and it is deeply frustrating to me. I am almost 40 years old, and I'm still dealing with this shit. Really, the same shit I was dealing with when I was 12. Oftentimes we're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? I'm a grown-up, right? And I'm still dealing with this. It's deeply frustrating to me. I'm getting better at it, but that is what it's just very hard. And just understanding that they're not just doing it. It's not like they're not aware of it and they're just doing it to piss you off, to make things harder for you because they are sometimes hard to deal with. No, they probably know very well what they're doing. The third thing is that change is really, really terrifying for a lot of people. It's really hard for a lot of us, and when you know change is going to happen, the things that come up, you might want to talk to them one-on-one, ask them how they feel and what they need. One of the key things that helps me, I'm really terrified to go to new places. So a lot of people, I was talking with somebody yesterday, he was talking about, we go to not Bermuda, he said, what is it, someplace in Mexico for a company retreat every year. And most people's reaction is that's awesome, we're going to go to Mexico, it's going to be fucking great, yeah. And my reaction to that is holy fucking shit, I don't know what's going to go on there, and I do not want to go. And I will immediately have a very, very bad, I want to run out of the room and die reaction. And so my reaction is very, very different. And so if somebody could talk to me about that, asking how I feel, what I need, and, at work, I've been able to establish a thing where I say, you know what, I know we're doing this company retreat, we're going someplace, and sort of freaked out about it. Could maybe somebody be like my buddy? And I could have a little buddy system where I can rely on this guy and he can help me out, and if I need to do X, Y, Z, he can help me with that. That is massively helpful to me, and might be helpful for other people too. The final thing I want to say, if you are in a position to do this, encourage them. Don't go crazy about it. Encourage them, but more importantly, enable them to seek help. I don't have time to get into a bunch of therapy and treatment stuff here, but if you are in any kind of position to help them kind of grease the wheels so it's easier for them to access treatment, to say, if you have a health plan, do you have a list of places that they can talk to? If they don't have health insurance, is that maybe you could help them out by getting some information about places they can go to that are low or no cost or sliding scale or things like that. enabling them to seek help is really, really, really key, because tons of people don't seek help for stuff because they're too scared to. And there's part of that is helping them not be scared, and part of that is making it easier so that they can overcome their fear. So, if you want to help with this stuff, and I've been kind of talking about this at a few different conferences, there's a couple of, the key thing I think is just talk about stuff. That's what I want people to do, is be talking about this, and share resources you find, share your feelings about this kind of stuff, things like that. The first link is on my website, homestrung.com/OSMI, Outsourcing Mental Illness. If you go there, I have a big list of resources. I've got all the videos of other times I've given this talk. The second thing is there's a cool thing NGR is doing called Prompt. I think you should check it out. A couple of people, me and another guy who was here, Greg Bagus. Prompt is a really cool thing that NGR is trying to sponsor to really increase the level of this discussion and get and overcome that stigma so that we can talk about this stuff openly. So talk, email, tweet, post, whatever the hell you do, get that out there and just get people talking about it. And that I think is going to be key. So thank you. I know I'm over. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for listening.